Now let's work on part D in this video. So what is the optimal number of flour baskets and the optimal level of the unit tax of coffee? What's the excess burden? What's going to be the welfare? So we solved already a similar question in part A or B, right? But what's the difference? What happened in part A and part B? Let's go over here to see what we did. Recall that in that case, we said that we would plant 100 flowers. Remember, because we just compared the marginal benefit with the marginal cost of the flower, so we decided to plant 100 baskets. And based on that, we found out that the optimal tax for coffee was equal to €1. So we did pretty much what we're going to do right now, but the difference is that we did not take into account the fact that additional taxes impose additional excess burden. So we did not take into account the marginal excess burden. But so far, in the previous video, right, in part C, we saw that we have this marginal excess burden, and now with this marginal excess burden in mind, we will see how much tax we have to charge, how many flowers we have to plant, what's the excess burden, and what's the welfare. So the difference between this and the previous question is that now we take into account the burden because of the tax of coffee. Hope this all makes sense. Now, how do we do that? Again, we're going to compare the marginals. And we know that in optimal, the marginal benefit would be equal to the marginal cost of providing that, that basket of flowers. So let me write it over here underneath it because we have the function already. We know that the marginal benefit of planting a flower is the derivative of the total benefit. So that was 2f derivative. We actually calculated, but let's do it over here one more time. 2f derivative is equal to 2. So the marginal benefit is equal to 2. Now, the marginal cost, we take all the marginal costs into account. The direct cost of provision and the marginal excess burden, which is tax of coffee divided by 2 minus 2 times the tax of coffee. Let's solve the math over here. 2 minus 1, we take 1 on the other side, right? 2 minus 1 is equal to 1. So 1 is equal to tax of coffee divided by 2 minus 2 times the tax of coffee. That means that the tax of coffee equals to 2 minus 2 times tax of coffee. So TC equals to 2 minus 2 times TC. Let's take the TC on one side. So we bring this one to the left. TC plus 2TC is equal to 3 times TC. So 3 times TC is equal to 2, right? That's equal to 2. Now let's divide both sides by 3 to find out what the optimal tax is. So TC is equal to 2 divided by 3, right? 2 divided by 3, that's equal to 0.66, meaning that 66% of the price. And recall that the price of the coffee was equal to €1. The price of the coffee was equal to €1, meaning that the optimal tax would be equal to 66 cents only, right? 66 cents only. And this is different. Notice how this is different from the €1 tax that we charged in the previous part of the question. This is different from that tax of €1. Why? Because we know that if we charge too much tax, we cause too much excess burden. And we want to find out the sweet spot of excess burden. And that happens when the tax would be equal to 0.66. Okay, we got that. Now, what matters? It matters to find out the excess burden. To find out the excess burden, we must know the change in the quantity demanded of the coffee. And to find out the change in the quantity demanded of the coffee, we also must know how much tax revenue optimally we must charge. So, one basket of flour costs €1. We must raise €1 for every basket. 1 times F is going to be equal to the tax revenue that we need. Meaning that the tax revenue is equal to F. Tax equals to F. Okay, that's going to be the optimal number of flowers, the actual tax revenue. What is the tax revenue? The tax revenue we raise from the coffee. So the tax revenue is going to be equal to the tax on coffee times the quantity demanded on coffee after tax. How much is that going to be? Well, we know this function. We calculated 2 videos ago or 1 video ago. Let's just take it because otherwise we will spend too much time on doing all the math one more time. This is it. This was the tax revenue with the tax of coffee in mind. So that's 200 times TC minus 100 TC squared. Let's write it over here. Where are we? Somewhere over here below. 200 times TC, so the tax revenue is equal to 200 times TC minus 100 times TC squared. 100 times TC squared. We already know that the optimal tax would be equal to 2/3 when we take into account the marginal excess burden. That's what we saw over here right now. That's 2/3. So let's substitute it into our function to see how much tax revenue we must raise. So the tax revenue is equal to 200 multiplied with 2 over 3, let's write it in green, 2 over 3, minus 100 times 2 over 3 square, 100 times 2 over 3 to the power of 2, 2 over 3 to the power of 2. Let's solve the math to see what we get. 200 times 2, that's 400, divided by 3, minus 100 times 2 squared, that's 4, so that's another 400, divided by 3 squared, which is 9. So we have a subtraction over here with two different denominators. Let's make it in a common denominator. 400 times 3, that's 1200. 1200 minus 400 divided by 9 is equal to 800 divided by 9. 800 divided by 9. And now let's understand why we did all this. Because the tax revenue is equivalent to the number of flowers. That's what we said. This is equivalent to the numbers of flowers. So what we found is one more part of the question. We found out the optimal number of flowers, which is 800 divided by 9, and that's equal to approximately 88.9 if we round up. This is the optimal number of flowers. Compare this to the previous part of the question. We had, in that case, 100 flowers planted because we only looked at the marginal benefit with the direct marginal cost. But since we have this marginal excess burden, we want to avoid the excess burden by planting less flowers, because planting less flowers would mean raising less tax revenue, would mean less taxes on the consumers, less excess burden. Hope this all makes sense. Now I think this is getting long, so we'll stop here. In the next video, we'll look at excess burden and the welfare.